Hello and welcome back to Vox Popcast, the weekly pseudo-academic roundtable of pop culture analysis with drinking and swearing. My name is Christopher Maverick, but you can call me Mav, and I am once again here with my co-hosts Hannah and Katya. And this time I said Hannah, on last week's show I actually called you Mav, and it made it through editing.
What?
And you answered. It was weird. I was like, how did that happen?
Sometimes you just get into a pattern and you just know what to say and when to say it.
Last week's show, I said, I'm Mav, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Wayne and Katya and Mav. How's it going, guys? And you answered.
Maybe we just don't pay attention to what you say.
We don't actually listen to you. We just know how this goes now.
You answered, and so I guess you're me now? I don't know. It didn't bother anybody.
No, I'm still me, and I'm happy being me. And there's
I don't even know how I did that.
There's no one.
I don't know anybody else named Mav.
Who's me? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you just really admire me, or something. I don't know.
It was weird. I'm like, how did I not catch that? How did no one catch that? And like I said, and I didn't even catch it on the first audio edit. I caught it when I was editing the YouTube video. So it was bizarre. I was like, okay, well, I guess that's just the thing now.
I want to point out that you didn't ask us how we were doing because you just launched into this very strange moment in our podcast history, I guess. And I actually had a positive answer for you this week.
I'm sorry. How are you doing, Hannah?
I'm doing much better now that I have a Nintendo Switch on the way after a year of being unable to get one.
It only took forever.
I'm jealous. I have no Nintendo Switch.
And it's the Animal Crossing edition, so it's like blue and pink.
Okay.
And no, blue and green. I don't know what the colors are.
I am kind of jealous of that, to be perfectly honest.
But your island is really nice, and my island doesn't exist.
My island is currently a disaster because I decided, fuck it, I'm redesigning the entire thing. So it will be nice.
So I've got an Intellivision. Does everybody remember Intellivision? I just want to feel included.
That's not. No.
And speaking of things that Mav doesn't have, that's what this episode is about, in a way.
Yes, my understanding is that we are going to do a deep dive into the 1970s hit American Girl by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. That is what we're doing on this episode, and I am here for it. Am I right?
No.
Oh, damn.
We are doing... okay, first of all, I've never made that association in my life, and I don't want to.
I would like to undo that association.
I'm undoing it right now. So today what we're really talking about is American Girl. They were released in 1986 by Pleasant Company, and I was on the internet last week, the week before, I don't know, time goes, I was on the internet and I was like, oh, they're re-releasing the original 6 historical dolls. And instead of spending a total of $900 on all 6 dolls, which is what it would cost to buy them, which we can get into later, I texted Katya and said, but what if we did an episode on American Girl and all things related? And then... So
is this like a GoFundMe scam kind of thing to get your dolls?
I feel like we also... Is this the first time we've had an episode just like on toys?
I feel like it might be. Yeah.
Just on toys, yeah. But before we go too deep, we've talked about toys before, but just on toys, this might be the first one.
This is not just on toys because there's books and other things like movies associated with it. And the books are, like the things I really held on to, but we can get into that in a minute.
Can I introduce the guest?
Yes.
My understanding of the American Girl dolls is I've seen them. I've bought toys for toys. Because they have accessories that I have bought for my nieces who have American Girl dolls or don't, which we'll get into in a little bit. But also beyond that, I just knew the Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers thing. So I invited a guest who knows more, somebody who knows several things about this. Monica Giraffa. Welcome, Monica. Hey.
Thank you so much.
Monica is a fashion historian. And when we were planning this show, and Hannah said she wanted to do the show, Katya mentioned, there's some really interesting things fashion about that we could talk about with American Girl dolls. And Mav, don't you know a fashion historian? I was like, I do know a fashion historian. So I invited Monica. I was like, do you want to talk about fashion and American Girl dolls? And also, do you know anything about American Girl dolls? And you said,
I know a lot about American Girl dolls.
Okay. Perfect. So hopefully you can make up for my, lack of understanding beyond Tom Petty. So
I feel like we don't always do this, but I just really think it could be useful for us to talk about our history, maybe not Mav, but the rest of us, our history with American Girl. And like,
I do have a slight history.
Yeah,
great. Let's start with Mav then.
Yeah.
Okay, my history with American Girl dolls is, I knew they existed, and when my nieces were 8 and 4, they both got very into them and decided that they wanted them for Christmas. And my sister-in-law got, that was their big Christmas present one year, or one of the big Christmas presents one year was to get American Girl dolls, except for it turns out American Girl dolls are stupidly expensive. So instead they got My Life dolls, which is a Walmart knockoff of American Girl dolls, which is compatible. They have the same dimensions, so they are clothing compatible and everything. So that's what they got. And for Christmas presents from all the rest of us, like from me and my wife and my other brother and his family, and my aunts and uncles, like they got a collection of American Girl doll clothing and accessories and bunk beds. I bought them bunk beds for their 2 dolls. And then also my niece Sophia also eventually bought herself a second My Life doll with her own money, which to this day, she's like 10 now, but she was 4 at the time. And to this day, she is very proud of having saved up the $30 to buy the Walmart doll of her on her own when she was 4. And I promised her I'd mention that. But that's my history with American Girl dolls. Beyond that, I know nothing. I do know that they're expensive because of that.
I mean, honestly, that brings up like an important point I feel like we should eventually talk about. What about you, Monica?
So my experience with American Girl dolls is sort of 1998 to like 2004. Which I feel like in American Girl doll history is this like very pivotal moment because that's the space where they get bought by Mattel and where they expand to starting to like actually have retail stores and not just operating off the catalog model. So I had 2. I had Samantha, and then I had one of the ones that looked like you. And one year for my birthday, my mother took me to the Chicago flagship store to have tea, which was like still to this day as an adult, I'm like, wow, that was one of like my best birthdays ever was getting to go to the flagship store and have tea with my doll because my mom, I grew up in a family of like Madame Alexander doll collectors, and those like they sit on the shelf. You do not touch them. You do not change their clothes. And so my American Girl dolls were treated very similarly. And so this was the only time my American Girl dolls were allowed to leave the house. And so like it was a really big moment because they were so expensive. So it was like, you better keep it nice forever. And I had a fair amount of accessories. Probably the biggest, most enviable thing of all of my friends who also had American Girl dolls was that I had the horse. So that was like a big deal at the time. I recently learned in my research that they also made a carriage to go with that horse. And I never got the carriage, but like, what? If there was a thing that I was going to go back through and like spend my money on as an adult, it would be the horse carriage.
Yeah, so you are a grown up now. This is a thing that you can do. I'm sure it's probably
it's super expensive because they didn't make it for very long, and it's very detailed. It was part of Felicity's collection too, so it's also like historic.
I think I remember when that came out. I think that that was like a very limited availability.
And then that was sort of my doll experience. But then I know we mentioned that they have the books too. And I read every single book and had every single book because for my parents, this was very much like an educational toy. And so like it wasn't really about the doll. It was about the history and the research and the learning that went with it.
Holy shit. You can buy one on eBay for $700.
Yeah.
The horse?
The carriage.
The carriage. There's one for $175. There's one for $99, and there's one for $700. And I feel like they're in varying states of repair. Wow.
With the $700 one, because I also did this research on eBay and was like, do I? Is new in box and includes all of the pieces.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I appreciate that you just know what listing he's looking up off the top of his head.
Oh, yeah. I did a lot of research this week, which is amusing because I probably didn't need to. And then my other big American Girl doll connection is my very first college internship was at Colonial Williamsburg in the millinery shop in the historic trades division. And American Girl started because the creator went on a trip to Colonial Williamsburg and was like, what if there were dolls that taught history? And so a lot of Felicity's story is based off of real locations in Colonial Williamsburg. So, and I was working in the dress shop. So the amount of little girls who come in with their Felicity doll, like, was just part of the like museum interpretation experience.
I feel like 90% of this episode is just going to be me occasionally gasping and like having a little like, oh my God, cool thing, panic. So,
and that's different than our show other times. But
this is like the episode we had on cuteness with Sailor Moon. This is right in the childhood, man.
It's not a complaint. I think it's delightful.
So Hannah, what is your storied history with American Girl dolls?
So I have vivid memories of looking through the catalogs with my mom and my sister and thinking about all the dolls I wanted, but we couldn't afford all the dolls I wanted. So I definitely have some like look-alike dolls for some of the characters still, like Josefina. I didn't get the American Girl doll, but I have a doll that looks kind of like the character. My mother got my sister and me Bitty Baby for Christmas, and we have so many Bitty Baby accessories. And I was talking to her a couple of days ago, and I was like, "What was Bitty Baby for me or for you?" And she was like, "Yeah, it was for me a little bit." But I will say I have been angry at American Girl in my childhood one time, and that one time was I guess this is an audio show, so most listeners don't know what I look like, but I have very curly hair. And American Girl didn't make the girl that looked like you dolls with curly hair for a long time. And then finally, my parents were like, we'll just get you one with straight hair. It's fine. And then they bought it. And then the next catalog came out, and they had a girl with curls. Just and that's what you do, you know? You buy something, you settle, and then it happens. But apparently, it's like hard to take care of like curly hair for American Girl dolls. There's like a whole like Reddit tutorial on it on the subreddit about it.
I can believe that.
So I guess maybe I dodged a bullet. My American Girl lookalike doll was more well dressed than I was because I had no fashion sense. I probably still don't, to be honest. But I read all the original 6 characters. And for those of you who were not as super into this as us, that's Felicity, Kirsten, Josefina, Abby, Molly, and Samantha. That is not in historical order. And then Kit Kittredge came out, and she was my absolute favorite because she was super into baseball and journalism, and that's how I learned about the Great Depression. And then I sort of like aged out before like Kaya was introduced, who is the like indigenous character from the Nez Perce tribe. Yeah. And now I look at the website and I'm like, I don't recognize a lot of these characters.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, I mean, I guess it's great that you learned about the Depression from your dolls, but it's also sad. And I don't,
American Girl dolls are intense.
Okay. Yeah. Look, I'll tell you what I was doing before we started recording, which was I was reading Meet Kirsten and texting Katya my reactions, which is her best friend dies of cholera on the ship on the way to America. And I was... Isn't
that like in the first, like, they talk about that, like, the first couple chapters?
Yeah, they talk about cholera, and then her best friend just straight up dies, and Kirsten's like, I need to go see her, and, like, Marta's family and Kirsten's family are like, no, you cannot go see her. And then when she gets to America, so she's, like, Swedish, and can't speak English, in the first book. And there's a scene where she gets lost and separated from her father, and she's, like... lost in this crowd, and she's like, I don't know, are they going to leave me? Are they going to leave New York without me? And it's just frightening, and it's a whole lot. So, and then I read Josefina's story too, and like her mother's dead, and that's sort of like the inciting like action. It's very much about grief. So
I mean, Samantha's entire story arc is like anti-sweatshops and child labor during the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah. My understanding is that there's a lot of darkness in the American Girl mythos. You said it was, let's teach kids about history, and history is not great a lot of times. My understanding is it's not, or I mean, maybe it is, and you guys will tell me about it, but it's not as whitewashed as it could be. So there's a lot of, and children worked in sweatshops like this one, and look at our doll.
I think there's like a real commitment to having some kind of like substantive history. I mean, there are some things that I think some of the books, like, they're not graphic, like massive, like they're not as okay, this isn't like Upton Sinclair. It's not as graphic as it could be. But as far as like children's literature, especially, you have to remember, like, most of these books are meant for like, grade school to middle school.
Yeah, right. Like, the characters are like 8, 9 usually.
For that age group, it's more than you normally see. It's pretty intense. I had to like talk about my mom about like what dolls I had. So I had, and my mom, I didn't like decide that I wanted these dolls. My mom found these dolls. So really these dolls were for her. So I had Josefina, Samantha, Felicity, and I think Kirsten. And I had almost entirely the historical ones, and most of them were pre-20th century because that's what my mom was really excited about. And I have also been to the Chicago flagship store. Honestly, even if you are not an American Girl doll person, but you like toys, it is a fabulous place to visit. I haven't been in years, but like when I went, it was delightful. Highly recommend. I'm sure it's only become more crazy and delightful. And I also went to some of the events because they did satellite events. We went to like a Samantha's Ice Cream Social one year for my birthday as well. Very memorable, especially because my mom sews. She made for both the dolls and me historically accurate children's clothing. That matched the period of the doll. So I had like an appropriate, like Samantha and I had like matching like Victorian outfits down to the boots. Like my mom found, so that like literally me and the doll had the exact same boots. There's pictures of it. And she even made some of her own designs on some things. She's like so like I said, these were for her as much as they were for me, which is why they are still like, my mom still hoards them. I don't think we've gotten, I'm like 31 now, and I think all of it is still in my parents' house. I didn't, let's see, I'm trying to think of any of the modern ones. I don't think I did. I think I had too many by the time, like the ones like Kit and everything started coming out. And I was just, and like, I think my parents were probably like, no, we already have 4 of them. This is ridiculous. But yeah.
So you're not gonna be spending $900 to get the historical anniversary collection.
No, but honestly, it's probably, if my mom listens to this episode, she might.
But I mean, you already have 4 of the 6, so.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, actually, now I'm thinking about it, I think I have Abby too. So I have 5 of the 6, actually. Which one am I missing?
So just the other one, yeah.
Are you missing Molly?
Oh my God. No, I think we have all 6. That's horrifying. Oh no.
Well, to be fair,
my mom kept buying them because like literally I never asked for them. Like I really loved them, but I never asked for them. They would just show up because I think my mom would find them and she was just like, oh, I want this one.
And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, my mom made clothes for my American Girl dolls too.
It's an important rite of passage. Yeah. Anyway, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I just realized my parents spent almost $1,000. Granted, it was over the course of like many years.
$150 is more expensive than their current lineup, and I think more expensive than they were in like the 90s.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They're more expensive. Yeah, they're more. I mean, the whole line is more expensive than it was when we were kids. But
I just want to know if like Monica and Hannah want to shiv Katya now, and like, is there like a thing?
I can't have 6. I cannot have 6. But I kind of remember I have at least 4. I'm gonna have to go to the box now. Oh no! Now I'm regretting not actually going and opening the box.
I have a question So, and I mean, I said that jokingly about like, shivving Katya. But like in all seriousness, though, I don't know enough about American Girl dolls, but I know the toy collector market, and whether we're talking about superhero action figures or Beanie Babies or Cabbage Patch dolls, and especially with Cabbage Patch dolls, there have been legit attacks over this. I remember, like, because I grew up, I'm a little older than you guys. I grew up in the 80s during the Cabbage Patch craze, and I remember like grown women, 30 and 40-year-old women fighting in aisles of Toys R Us, like fist fighting and hurting each other and sending each other to the hospital trying to get a preemie doll in like 1986 and 1987. So was that like a thing? Did that happen with American Girl dolls?
So they're not available in stores for the most part, other than like the actual American Girl stores, which I think there's one in Chicago. Is there one in New York? They're like there's a very limited number.
So it's mostly online orders.
So recently they've expanded.
And actually, weirdly, there was a temporary store in Raleigh.
That's cool.
But not while I think we were in graduate school, which it's probably best I didn't know that anyway.
Like likely. But I think like you also remember that these were and are expensive. Like I think that's the other thing is like I think even just in our stories, your parents and realistically most likely your mother, but we're not hating on guys that love historical dolls too. We're non-binary humans. But like I think you have to have a parent that's invested in what American Girl dolls are and represent. Like Hannah mentioned, like it being an educational experience because they're not cheap. Like you can buy a doll and really a high quality, fairly nice doll for much less expensive than an American Girl doll. If you're getting an American Girl doll, you are buying into the idea that this is a historical doll. And especially if you're buying the books, that there's an educational aspect to it. I think it's a different kind of thing than like the Cabbage Patch frenzy.
There is a comment that sort of speaks to this, Mav. Mark Schultz says his wife has been re-exposed to the brand through her niece and daughter and has become an expert. She's a part of a Facebook group for collectors intended to share pics, answer questions, and sometimes sell to each other. Not a day goes by that I don't hear about the eBay price hikes, the cutthroat mentality of Uber collectors, or the clicky popular girl attitude some of them project passive aggressively towards others in the group. My wife likes having something to share with our daughter and also an opportunity to enjoy something she didn't have in her childhood, looks for bargains, rare eBay finds that are reasonably priced, or cashes in online bucks to afford new accessories. She knows how to identify a Pleasant Company original versus the newer models, which ones have better hair, etc. As far as the re-releases, she'd rather spend money piecing together an original, but can see the appeal, especially for newer or returning fans. So apparently there is some of that, especially now on the internet.
Well, I'm wondering, there's a point during Cabbage Patch Mania where so they're $30-ish, which is probably about $80-ish in current things. So American Girl dolls retail for what, like $150 or $200 or something like that?
Yeah, that's
$150 now.
That's the historical dolls. It's like $110-ish for the historical classic dolls. It's like $110-ish on the website for some of the like newer historical. It's they have a lot of different price points.
Okay, so they're a little more expensive, but at the time, Cabbage Patch was a major status symbol. Like not so much for me because gender roles and I was a boy, but there was definitely at the when I'm in 3rd and 4th grade, the cool girls had Cabbage Patch dolls. Like if you didn't have a Cabbage Patch doll, you were lame. All the cool kids had them, right? And then like there was like a definite resurgence. I mentioned that my nieces wanted them when they were like 4 and 8, 6 years ago, and they're now, and there was definitely status then, like, even at 4 and 8, they wanted them because, well, my friend has an American Girl doll that looks just like her. I want one of these, right? So there were cool points associated with it. And all of you told the story sort of very much, and some of our commenters said this too. Carolyn Salvi, who's been on our show, she mentioned about being able to play with her daughter and her daughter not being as interested in it as she was, as she is, and you guys sort of hinted with that with your moms. So is the status not the same? Like, is it really about, did you like them because it's an opportunity to share something with mom, or was there any of the, I am the first kid to have the new Samantha doll. Everyone bow before my glory.
I'd be interested to hear about people's experiences. I mean, I think for me, it was, I really liked the dolls. I mean, hello, I'm a giant nerd. And it's a different kind of like, and it's, if you are a bookish, nerdy child, American Girl dolls were great because you got a toy and books. Yeah. Like how often do you get, and you got like, and not like, because like sometimes you see books with like kind of mediocre toys. This is before like Harry Potter and all that stuff, and you had like, you know, that whole like branding thing. But like you very rarely got good toys that had to go with books, like either or vice versa. Either the toy was the thing and the book was like a throwaway piece of garbage, or the book was the thing and the toy was a throwaway piece of garbage. Like for American Girl dolls, the dolls were amazing and the books were great, and there were so many of them.
I also think that like people talk about connecting with the characters of American Girl dolls, and it's not, it's different, I think, than connecting with somewhat a different kind of toy, because American Girl dolls are characters in books and they have their own personalities and interests. And even like reading Josefina's story today, she talks about like being afraid of like lightning and snakes. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. And, you know, it's like sometimes superficial, sometimes less so. Because, you know, like we're reading about like kids' class struggles, you know, that just people can relate to that. Thinking about being in a new place, you can relate to Kirsten. It can be very superficial when you're, you know, 9 to 10 years old, but you know, there are other, you know, deeper things you connect with too. And so like I think that a lot of people liked the dolls because they came to them through the books. And I mean, like the books were actually my like main entry point into the historical characters, because I could afford the books, and or the public library could allow me to read all of them.
I was thinking about this, and it's more from the perspective of how does one play with an American Girl doll? Because they're obviously like, they are expensive and they are collected. But as a kid, like the playing with the doll is really like the reading of the book next to your doll, which I feel like is a different way than you would play with any of these other collectible toys. Like it was really set up as this like individualized experience, which was really nice, under the understanding that like you could do all of this imaginative play on your own. And I also sort of thought about the ways that like when you play with a contemporary doll versus a historical doll, it's a little bit different because they don't come with the book. So I think the one that was contemporary for me got more use because there was a sense of like being able to enact your own stories versus at the time, I think because of the book, my creativity felt limited to reenacting the stories that were in print already.
And, you know, sorry, go ahead.
No, period, end of sentence. Go ahead.
I was just saying, you know, actually going off of that, I'm pretty sure when I got my contemporary American Girl doll, it came with a storybook to like kind of like write your own story, or someone
like a blank one.
Yeah, like a blank book.
Yes, I do remember
like
that.
Okay.
Like a little journal.
So is that a thing you do? Because I'm again learning about this. These dolls, that you're talking about, the later dolls you're talking about are designed literally to look like you, or you know, a doll approximation of you, right?
You get to pick like the hair. You get to pick like basically the features of your doll. So like the hair color, the skin color, the things like that.
It looks like me in as much as my Animal Crossing character or my creator wrestler in WWE SmackDown, right? It's okay. So and all three of you had one.
I did not have it. I only ever had the historical ones. So I had kind of the opposite experience, where for me, like the fact that there was a book with it was like kind of what I enjoyed. Like I enjoyed the kind of role playing aspect of like, I'm going to dress up as Samantha and pretend that I'm a Victorian lady and learn about labor history at the same time.
But and Hannah and Monica, you guys
why I became the way I am.
You guys both had the looks like me dolls.
Yes. And I will say it was very important to me that Samantha never wore contemporary clothes, and the contemporary doll never wore Samantha's clothes. Like there was no mixing of the temporality of those two dolls or their interests, despite the fact that like they might both be wearing winter coats and they might both be like enacting Christmas. but something about it, like for me, they had to be separate.
I mean, even just thinking about it now, thinking about it now, I'm just like that. Why would you do that? It's like asking like the contemporary, like, 9-10-year-old doll to wear Bitty Baby's clothes. That would just be weird. It would just be wrong.
It makes sense to me. So, but my question then is, so does the Monica looking doll and the Hannah looking doll, do you name them Monica and Hannah, or are they just girls that like are, they look like me, but it's not. It's like my doll, Judy.
Oh, I don't remember what I named it, but I remember specifically writing the story about a very different girl who had a different family. Okay. Yeah. I mean, like she did not look like me. She did not have curly hair. I'm never going to let it go.
So for me, she was named after my middle name, and she was me. So all of the outfits that I chose were things that were like she had a little art set because I was interested in painting, and she had a little baking outfit because I was interested in baking. We would have never bought her ice skates because I cannot ice skate. I was a very particular kid.
Okay. So but because the reason I'm wondering is because of the way you talked about like the play. Monica said that the play with the historic dolls is very much, I'm going to sit in bed or on my little chair or whatever next to the doll, and I am going to read the story of how Samantha got cholera or whatever the story. I don't know. I obviously don't know the actual stories, but I'm going to read the story. So they each come with like a little booklet or a novel-ish, a kid's book, right? A chapter book, I assume.
It's a short chapter book. There's like, it's kind of like a set series. So like the first in the series of any doll is like meet Kirsten, and then there's like Kirsten's surprise, and like Kirsten saves the day, and you see them, and then
you go to Barnes and Noble and you buy the other 12 books or whatever. So
each girl originally had 6 books, and they might have added more later, and then like every single one of them discusses some version of the holiday time, their birthday, the summer. So it's like a year in the life of that child. And then in the back of all of those books, there's a little historical section that's basically like a fact checking section of like, were children really working in factories, and was it really that bad? And here's a photo of some children in a factory. Like there was that. And then there would be like little like for Kirsten's books, they might have some like cute little Swedish words in the back or something like that.
Josefina's book is set in New Mexico before New Mexico was part of the United States, and the note in front of the book is like, her family speaks Spanish, so you will see some Spanish words in this book. Which is I probably actually my first encounter with Spanish, like you're just reading. And also I will say, like, having like read Kirsten's book just now, and also I discovered a podcast called American Girls, which is like they read the books like in order chronologically, and they start with the original 6 historicals. And I didn't listen to all of it, but they're 2 historians revisiting these books after get into their childhood, and they deep dive into history and what is covered in these books and what is not covered is very interesting to them, and also me, because it can be real strange what they choose to leave in and leave out. And I've never read Kaya's books, but one thing that like fans of American Girl like to note is that in developing the character, they like consulted with indigenous people, but there's actually still a lot wrong in those books, and I'll have a link in the show notes. So like representation is like a question that is covered on the American Girls podcast, and also like is a big thing in just sort of the company's marketing. Like if you go to the Wikipedia page, it's like these historical girl dolls like cover, like all the characters of these historical periods are from different like ethnicities, religions. Like they're a very diverse group. They speak different languages. And, like what I think that American Girl is actually interesting as a concept, and like, what does it mean to be an American girl, especially since some of the American girls aren't technically American in the sense of like U.S. America at the time that their stories are being told.
America in a broad and complicated and slightly colonizery way.
Yes.
Well, that was going to be my next question. So as a middle-aged man with no children. One of the few things that I know about American is at least part of their identity, their marketing identity, is that it's supposed to be very much a representation matters. Get a doll that looks like you. We are trying to tell the full story. And you're saying that is not accurate or more accurate than other toys, but still not great or kind of okay or what?
There have been multiple controversies over the years about representation in American Girl.
We'll put it this way of like, should they have made little white Mary Jo Ellen from the 1950s, like as one of their like most recent contemporary offerings? Like, probably not. No.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's I don't know. I think it's hard.
It's 100% her name.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And like, of all of the things to discuss in the 1950s, they're like, let's put her in Florida and make her obsessed with Hollywood. And it was like, ooh, of all the stories that we could tell.
Please tell me she has like, like a housewife shirtwaist dress with high heels for vacuuming look.
Oh yeah, it's a poodle skirt with a full-on little embroidered poodle on there.
Of course she does. Okay.
Yeah. Wow. It's exactly what you kind of expected.
Okay. Wow.
I mean,
okay.
I think for me it's like hard. Okay. I think part of the challenge is like the inherent challenge of like, how do you present history in a real and raw way, in a way that's appropriate for children? Which is why I hesitate to say that they're like good historic representations, right? Because I think they're better than many examples, but like, they're also kind of bound by like, I wouldn't say bound, but like they have to be attentive to sort of like the consumer aspect, right? Like they're not going to make an Angela Davis doll anytime soon, I don't think. Like America is not prepared. Like, and I don't know, like imagine what it would look like to make, a Japanese American doll and talk about the history of American internment. Also don't know that the United States is prepared. Like, I think that they're working, like they're working with the bounds of not only like what people want to buy as toys, but also what is the average American parent willing to kind of accept on a mass scale, right? Because these are really popular.
I listened to not all, but a couple episodes of the American Girls podcast, and I listened to their analysis of the first Addie book. And Addie was the first Black character in American Girl, and she also begins her first book as an enslaved person in North Carolina, and the first book chronicles their escape. And also you should listen to that episode because it's really good. They do really brilliant just textual analysis there. I really enjoy anyway. But they talk about the history of Addie, and there was a question by American Girl about whether or not a Black character would sell, and there's also like the controversy that they cover of the fact that she was an enslaved doll and also a commodity. And further jumping ahead, there have been dolls of color that have been retired, and American Girl has been like, well, we're moving away from this line. This is a marketing decision. And when you look at the amount of dolls, there are a lot more white dolls than there are dolls of any other race, just straight up. And like some are not represented in the current lineup at all, I believe. There's also been a controversy that I learned through, again, listening to this American Girl podcast about the fact that American Girl also didn't want to create a doll with Down syndrome because they didn't believe that it would sell. And there was a petition on change.org. So like there's all sorts of like things bound up in what people like what the company believes will and will not sell, and how they make decisions that are disappointing given what idealistically you'd want these dolls to represent. But also America is not idealistic either. And
right. Which is why I think it's like complicated. Like, are they doing a decent job? Yes. Are they doing a perfect job? No, because it's a toy company and capitalism is capitalism. And I also kind of wonder, like, what would it like? I mean, the like Angela Davis doll is kind of facetious. Also, I feel like Angela Davis would have qualms about being made into an American Girl doll on so many levels.
They're all fictional. Are there actual people?
Yes.
Oh, there are actual people.
They're all fictional. Like they're based off of like in some cases they're based off of historical people, but as far as I'm aware, they're all fictional.
So
there's no Betsy Ross or anything.
No,
or is there?
But there was a little bit of controversy because one of the they release a contemporary like Girl of the Year. And a few years ago, the quote unquote Girl of the Year is a ripoff of Amanda Gorman, actually.
Oh.
So she is an African American doll who happens to is interested in poetry and dance. And actually, Amanda Gorman talks about it in her Vogue article, which I think is last month's issue, if I remember right. And American Girl asked her to come to the unveiling of the doll, asked her to read a poem, asked her to dress up in the outfit that matched the doll. And it was incredibly uncomfortable because they had essentially used her likeness without her permission and then modeled her after the doll to push sales of that doll without ever fully publicly acknowledging that this was the Amanda Gorman doll.
Yeah.
Yes. So
that's so gross.
There's no other is this a real person? But that's a pretty egregious example of it's a real person.
I'm all for teaching children the horrors of history starting in age 2, but I'm a weird person that doesn't have children. But I don't know, that's a complicated issue, right? If you're saying yes, I want to learn history and I think having representation matters, but you don't do representation by literally stealing the life of a real person. That's weird. Stealing the identity.
Especially because you could just talk to Amanda Gorman and be like, hey, would you be interested in being a doll now? And also probably getting a cut of the profits, because
that's what Mattel does with Barbie. Right. not that I'm saying that Barbie is the bastion of of anything good, right? I think there are good and bad points of Barbie, but Barbie has over the years had many historic women dolls, and they get them by going to whoever and saying, hey, we'd like to make a doll of you. Are you in? And sometimes they say yes, and then they make them, and that's a thing that you could do. Amanda Gorman has a phone number and presumably an email address.
Or the PR people wouldn't have been able to ask her to read a poem. Yeah,
right. They found her when they wanted to use her. So make a deal with her. I don't. Wow, that's so gross. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. Yeah. That's gross.
Yeah. The one I was aware of was that there's a Hawaiian doll who I did not realize existed until today. And one of the members of the advisory board, part of the story is based on a book called Pearl Harbor Child, A Child's View of Pearl Harbor from the Attack to Peace. And it's a story that inspired the doll, apparently. But apparently that the difference is that the author of the book was involved in the shaping the doll to some degree. There's a link in the show notes about that. So so that seems like a better way to approach things, though. I think that something I've learned through research and listening to podcasts and reading these articles is it feels like there are advisory boards now to some degree when creating these historical dolls, but a lot of the creative decisions and writers are still white.
Is it public who the advisory board is? Because that would be fascinating. Because an advisory board is great, but it entirely depends on who's on it.
I'm not sure how, I know that there are general things that are said that's we worked with indigenous people. I'm not sure if they specified who.
All right. So the things that I know about American Girl dolls, again, being the person who never had one. Aww. I was hoping for Oz, but thank you. Being the one who never had one, I know that they at least claim, given what I just learned, but they claim to be working towards diversity and inclusion, which is, at least in theory a positive, but they're still an American company and capitalist gonna capitalist. So, I get that, right?
Imperialist gonna imperialist.
Yeah. And I know that they are very popular with grown up adult women who like to pretend that they're for their children. But that's a thing that just happens with toys. I'm buying this 2,000 piece Lego set for my 6-year-old. Sure, we're going to put together the space shuttle. Yeah, that's going to happen. You know, those are like, there are a lot of toys where it's really for the grown-ups. So I don't think your moms are that weird by, you know, getting you toys that you're not allowed to take out of the house. That's a thing that happens. But I am curious about, you know, the other thing that I know is, you know, again, from my nieces who were very into this, I know that there's the outfits. And Monica, you even said that, you know, it was very important that that the outfits for the U doll and the Samantha doll be historically accurate to their time period. But that means you're changing her outfit, even though, because you said most of the playing is just reading the book to the doll. But I presume you still use it the way that one uses a baby doll, which is I'm going to dress her up. And today she's going to wear blue, you know, or whatever. Right.
Yeah. So each of the historical dolls had a wardrobe that correlated to each book. So they had a minimum of sort of 6 outfits, and the outfit was also the outfit that's being depicted on the cover of that book.
Mm-hmm.
But then there might be some additional outfits that are sort of like mentioned within the books, but aren't necessarily illustrated. So, for example, like Samantha has an outfit that she has to change into to be able to climb trees or to be able to have tea. And those might not have been on the cover, but those would be sort of like 2 additional outfits within the wardrobe.
And all outfits sold separately. So
of course. And in most cases, the outfit and the accessories are also sold separately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you have to go buy the tea kit separately.
Oh yeah, if you want to get deep into American Girl, welcome to spending hundreds, if not. Like, I'm not having stress flashbacks thinking about how much my parents must have spent. I'm really glad my mom made most of our stuff, because
I was going to say it's not just the dress and the tea set, but it might also be like the hat and the hair ribbons and the tights and the shoes and like some tiny little extra version of the actual outfit that goes on the doll's body is sold separately.
You could also get tiny editions of the books that were doll sized that were like printed inside, like they were actually the full book.
Oh, so the doll can read the book.
The doll can read the book while you're reading the book. I don't know if they still make those, but I think I still have a couple.
Can you get a little doll for the doll?
Yes.
Like, can you get Samantha?
Actually, yes.
Awesome. You can get Samantha a tiny Samantha doll.
Yes.
Well, I don't think there's the miniatures, and they're like also in the books. I don't remember if I'm sure they sold it. Kirsten has her own rag doll. Like, they have their own toys. Like Bitty Baby had Bitty Bear, and you could, like, when you bought stuff for Bitty Baby, Bitty Bear had matching stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like it was a whole thing.
Well, but I meant specifically American Girl dolls. So they have American Girl dolls that the American Girl dolls can use.
Yes.
Yes.
That's so cool. So because now I can inception this forever and just constantly sell you more and more expensive, tinier and tinier things.
Absolutely. That's like awesome. The entire American Girl doll experience. Like
the miniature
and then there's events, and there's and then there's all the events you can go to, and some of the events have like special things that you can only buy in person, or there's things that are exclusive to the store. Like, it is like, take everything from like niche toy collecting with like a popular yet niche toy, and it's because it's for kids and it's for adults. I think because of that, because it's expensive and because it's a collector's item. I think especially now that there's a generation that grew up with American dolls in like the 90s, it's now having children. I'm sure many people who had American Girl dolls as kids are now buying them for their kids, for their children. Like, it would shock me if that was not the case.
Amelie, not a person with a child who will buy dolls for her child that don't exist. But I did find out this week that they've changed Kit's outfit from the original, and that's like viscerally upset me.
They've changed most of them. And from like a historical, obviously none of these clothes are like historically accurate. Sure. From a historically accurate perspective, the stuff that they brought out, there was really like, it might have been like more adult than actual like child's fashion of the time. But there was this attempt to really think about like what the actual fabrics and materials would have looked like. And then in the new dolls, with all of the like wardrobe changes, it's a little bit like when you go into and maybe this is too niche of a reference, but when you go into a costume house, there's always clothes that are meant to look historically accurate. And then there's always a section of like dresses from like musicals that were made in like the Technicolor era that are like not historically accurate, but they were like, wow, look at all this color. And that's how all of the dresses now for all of the contemporary designs look, is they've really abandoned any attempt at historical accuracy. And it feels a little bit more like the really bright Halloween costume version of what all of these clothes used to be, in a way that's really sad. Because when you push out this narrative of like, we're teaching kids about history, it really felt like there was a greater attempt to do that when they were originally released.
Well, and I mean, how much of that though is like kind of the theatrical aspect, kind of like you were saying, of like, there's often a difference between what is historically accurate to what reads historically accurate for the average person who probably doesn't know anything about the fashion of these periods, right? Like, I always go back to flapper fashion, because what people think a flapper actually looked like is so radically different from how flappers actually dressed.
That's a movie adventure. My example is cowboys. Cowboys didn't really exist. I mean, there are people who tended cows, but the thing that is in your head when I say cowboy is not a historically accurate thing. That's all a Hollywoodized thing. So I assume that. Well, so I mean, Monica, are you saying they moved from one to the more fictional thing?
Exactly. I mean, it's a really important distinction, and like flapper fashion and cowboy dress are like really great examples, especially because they were so perpetuated like by Hollywood and cinema that like helped manufacture these perceptions. And so it's very much the original garments are what people thought historically accurate was without fully knowing. And then the new outfits are very much this like very costumey version. A really great example, I feel like, is if you look at the redesigns of Julie, who's like the 1970s doll. Like her original wardrobe was pretty flowy and pretty loose, and the colors are pretty muted. And now when you purchase her, the thing that she shows up in is like a peace sign rainbow like tie-dye t-shirt, which is just like not what any photo of a person who lived in the 1970s actually looks like.
Right.
And that's what I mean of like, we've really started, I guess, perpetuating stereotypes over history. Like they've released a 1980s doll. And if you are horrified by the amount of like acid wash denim and leg warmers and scrunchies that you never wore in the 1980s, like, and if we're really talking doll inception, she's from 1986, and therefore she comes with her own tiny Molly, because that's the first year that American Girl doll was available for purchase.
But is it the weird jazzercise Courtney one?
Yeah, Courtney.
She's a gamer though.
Oh my God! So I just found her. Okay. So having lived through the 1980s, and
it's like jazzercise doll.
Yeah.
So, okay. So this is weird, because this is like, I was around for the 70s, but not as aware of like what fashion it would have been. 1980s. Courtney is what every girl might wish she could have been in the 1980s. Courtney looks like what kids on television during the 1980s, like, you know, that's not everyday look. Like there were definitely, if you tuned into, you know, like, I'm trying to think of, like, if you were watching a 1980s kids movie, if you watched
she's like
Kids
Saved
Incorporated.
by the Bell. Yeah.
Yeah, Saved by the Bell, which would have been a little later, but yeah, Kids Incorporated was what I was thinking of. If I were watching something like that, everyone was dressed like this, but nobody I actually went to school with had, you know, this level of fashion, because it would be. Oh my God, she's amazing.
That's the thing. That's the issue. That's like one of the things. Kind of, we're talking about like the sort of historical accuracy and kind of like what they're doing well and doing poorly. I mean, that's one of the, I feel like, weird things about American Girl doll, because even when you have characters that in their storyline are from lower classes into poverty, or like we're talking about Abby slavery, often the way they're represented, because they have to, you know, because they're selling all these accessories and stuff like that, doesn't align with that. Like the dolls from the Great Depression still have tons of stuff.
Yes.
And like, whether or not that's historically accurate, and whether or not it's necessarily even true to their story. Because if I remember correctly, and I might not, like, Kit loses her house I think at some point.
Yeah, her father loses his job. They do a boarding house, and like it's very depressing.
Right.
And
but I think
like
the dolls kind of skew towards representing people who have a fair amount, like who have means in one way or another.
Well, let me tell you about the homeless American Girl doll.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Oh, I need to know this.
So there's a
What?
So there's something called Girl of the Year now, and so every year they just release a doll, and the American Girl Doll Company chose to release Gwen Thompson, a homeless American girl, and she apparently lives in like a car with her mother, and
She looks great.
and well, it's sort of more like she costs $95 or like she costs like, you know, she like costs $95, and it's like, you know, it's like back to the weirdness in particular of some of these dolls of like, should, given the economic situation, the class position, the subject position of this doll, like, should this doll be on sale?
Whoa.
I'm looking at the Gwen doll now. I have so many questions. This is going to be so. If you get a chance, and if you're one of the people who normally listens to the show just on audio, check the YouTube version, because I'm going to be sure to put this up. As I'm looking at Gwen now, and she's homeless, you say. I guess good for her, because you have no way of knowing.
She's also blonde.
Like,
I feel like that's a very important
And very pretty.
you know, I mean, like, it's like she's like, I don't know what homeless would be, because other than the fact that they said that she's homeless, like, it's exploitive in that. What are you even doing? It's just a doll that you decided was homeless. you know, I don't know what, you know, she looks like she's got a very nice dress on. She's got a very expensive haircut. What are you doing?
Do books come with the doll of the year thing? Or is it just the doll and you're just expected to just intuit some kind of story that in some way connects with being homeless, despite the fact that the doll has no...
They have one book instead of 6.
Yep.
Okay. I would be fascinated to read that book.
However, she is not the book. So that year, they released 3 girls, and she's like a side character in the book, and is technically not the Girl of the Year. She's like part of the supporting cast.
That feels even worse.
Yeah, and apparently, no proceeds from the sale of the doll went directly to help the homeless.
So this was like a really shitty cash grab. Is what I'm hearing.
Oh, I have so many questions, but I don't even know how to ask them.
Okay, I'm backtracking on what I said earlier about like the historical. They're trying their best. I mean, maybe with the historical ones they are, but this more contemporary stuff. Whoa, like this is dang.
So we said a lot of this gets dark, you know. So
well, I guess because like my experience is mostly with the historical stuff of reading as a kid, and I don't know as much about the more contemporary stuff. They were dark because the stories and the history that they covered were dark. They need to revisit that advisory board.
Well, I think
a little bit.
I think the advisory board change when they do have an advisory board. I think it changes based on what doll is being crafted.
I mean, I think it's just, I don't know what it is to say other than this is problematic on so many levels, because on the one hand, I mean, it's profiting from homelessness for a very expensive doll. So presumably, like, I'm going to make an assumption that unless you are a person who is scraping together your money, you are probably a person of some means if you're buying this doll. And then to not even make it a central part of the book donate the proceeds at all, like, feels really gross.
Well, you're saying she's a hanger-on character, right? She's not a primary protagonist. So you only have her because clearly if you're cool, you know, if you're going to buy just one, you're going to get probably one that looks more or less like you, or, or one that's just your favorite from the books. Right. But like Gwen can't be anybody's favorite. Right. So I imagine she's the doll that you have if you have several of them.
Why can't she be anyone's favorite?
because there's not enough, because you said she's only got one book, right? I mean, she could be someone's favorite. I shouldn't say like she can't be.
Yeah, because I mean, I think it would be. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just imagine if she's a side character in one book as opposed to the lead character in 6 books, she's probably, more people like Spider-Man than like, Frogman is what I'm getting at, right? So like she can't be the most popular character. So I imagine most people who have a Gwen doll have 6 or 7 or 10 American Girl dolls. So now this character only exists as, sort of a collector's item that you better buy as a rich person to show everybody how woke you are because you're supporting the homeless.
I mean, potentially. I mean, I think potentially, because because we were talking about earlier, it's like being drawn to dolls that like people like you in some way identify with, like,
Right.
Like the nerdy ones. And like, I could imagine it being a really powerful thing to have a doll where its story is basically like, hey, housing insecurity, because that's the thing that people really deal with. But
if you have housing insecurity,
if you have housing insecurity, you're not going to buy this doll. So yeah, I think you're right. It's like, this is for adults who this is. I mean, I'm not going to say that there's not an adult who now has the means to buy this doll.
Sure.
Isn't going to buy it because they connect with that as their experience. But
just primarily is what. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure.
And that's what feels gross about it is it's basically like commodifying homelessness. I mean, this is a very different example, but this is actually like similar to something I think I've talked about the show before, but I gave a presentation on. Is like the way that Banana Republic made Mad Men fashion,
right?
Because it was basically selling what was presented on the show as secretarial fashion, which was not. It would have been very expensive to dress the way that they did in that show, and they would not have been able to afford it most likely on the kind of salaries that a secretary is paid. But then at Banana Republic, for women who make substantially more money than the average secretary does in most places. So it's sort of the same thing where it's like you are commodifying a different class experience for a class with more means and more privilege. And commodifying in a way is inaccurate because, as you're saying, like the doll does not, like you wouldn't, looking at the doll out of context, you wouldn't know that there's anything about homelessness represented.
Right. She's just a pretty baby doll in a white dress. Like, okay. I mean, and I don't know the solution because I don't want them to make her look like the stereotypical beggar that I mean,
is there an appropriate way to commodify homelessness? Because I agree. It's like doing that would be equally as gross, but like, is there a way they could have done it, or if they should have just not done it at all?
One critique at the time, which I linked to, was someone said, Tanya Tull, who's the president of Beyond Shelter, said, quote, she's afraid that they're going to pick up the idea that it's okay, that's an accepted segment of society that some children are homeless and some children are not. So it's, in her mind, reinforcing the common structural problems in the U.S. rather than,
especially if it's representing like I hesitate to say glamorized, but I can't think of a better word, like version of what homelessness looks like. Mm-hmm. Like there's no connection whatsoever. And it's like, potentially it's like, oh, well, like the doll looks fine. Therefore homelessness must not be that bad.
Right. You don't want to put a doll in beggar clothes either. I don't know what they're going for here is what I'm getting at.
I don't either. I mean, like, and had they made it some kind of like, I mean, even making it a charity collector's item feels, I mean, at least if there was like money going to charity or like, for every doll sold, one goes to a shelter or something like that.
I will footnote my previous comment.
That would make it feel less gross. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll footnote my previous comment and say, American Girl point out they do give money to like aid the homeless, but the proceeds from the doll don't, in case anyone is very into American Girl and wants to point that out. But it's still not the same, and it's still just.
So yes. Like, I mean, if they're donating anyway, it's like if the donation's not tied to the doll, which is honestly better, I feel like in some ways, because then it's less transactional. But why can't they just donate to the cause and not commodify
it? They said that they wanted to promote tolerance, and it was an awareness thing, but I don't buy that argument for all the reasons.
That's a great, even if you take it at face value, like that's their intention, which I think is a great and admirable one. I don't think this is how you do it.
But, and also if they say that about this particular doll, why do they refuse to make other dolls they don't think will sell? I think I answered my own question by asking that question in that particular way, but here we are.
Well, maybe we should move on because I feel like it's just like, this is bad, guys. This is really bad. Why would they do this? They should not have done this. I feel like we're kind of like going over and over about how this homeless doll is a mistake with a capital M. But I think there's something here, though, about like the way that she's dressed, not connecting with it. And I'm interested to hear from Monica about like, I guess your thoughts about like the fashion in general or about specific dolls and kind of like, I don't know, just your take on the experience of playing with these dolls and dressing these dolls.
I mean, one thing that we kind of toed around but didn't totally get to was the idea that of like this fashion being aspirational for 9-year-olds, which is something that's really interesting to me, of like, we are essentially acknowledging like an entirely separate fashion system and value system of like, this is what is not just like fashionable during this time, but what is like considered wanted by someone who's also purchasing these dolls. Because like when you look at the clothes now, there was a fair amount of me being like, oh, they were so much better growing up. And it's like, I don't think they are. I think it's just that in my memory is still aspirational, like a lot of those clothes. And so maybe it's not necessarily a better or worse thing. But the one thing I'll say beyond like the idea of them becoming less historically accurate over time was that the actual like way that you dress them has changed too. Like these dolls used to acknowledge the idea that like period clothing exists in layers. And now everything is sort of like stitched together to be all in one. And obviously like they didn't include every layer. But the idea that like some of these dolls included like little just white, like cotton shifts that were supposed to go under their skirt or their dress or something. And also the amount of like difficulty that I remember having as a kid where I was like, oh my God, these boots have like real like grommets and eyelets that you have to like stitch up instead of just like a little zipper. Or like Samantha.
Oh, I loved all that stuff.
Samantha came with this pair of like historically inaccurate Mary Jane shoes that were like made of rubber that would take a good half hour every time you wanted to put them on your doll. Like,
I like, maybe my experience was niche, but like I really loved that aspect of like, but it would take time to dress your doll.
Oh yeah.
Like that was a process, which I actually kind of enjoyed because I mean, it's not surprising that I ended up being a sewing person. And particularly a vintage sewing person, maybe. But like, yeah, like the fact that it was a process for me was like part of like the play.
Yeah.
In some ways.
It's like it took so long dressing it. By the time then you're like, well, now I'm done. Like, now I'm tired out.
Totally see like what. Right. I could see how that process is not appealing to a lot of people, but yeah, it is kind of sad to me that they've kind of made like everything's been stitched together and it's kind of like one and done. I mean, and it's also in some ways I feel like why I think I personally enjoy the much more like older historical dolls because it has more of the like clothing as a process, because like the ones you get in the 20th century, I mean, appropriately so, are much more like modern ready to wear. Although that's very cute. The 1960s doll. I want that dress.
Yeah.
It wasn't the same as like dressing Felicity, right? But there was so much to Bitty Baby's outfit that I was like, I do not want a real child if it's like this is like this one like doesn't squirm, but like imagining trying to put these clothes on a real thing, and by thing I mean human. It's not. I don't think this is for me.
More fans, aren't you? You're saying American Girl dolls made you not want to have children, not want to reproduce. Like this is responsible right here. You're saying
American Girl dolls made me realize that I am lucky to take care of myself.
Wow.
Which actually they did like write books called The Care and Keeping of You that actually were very helpful in learning how to like take care of oneself.
That's kind of neat.
The book where I learned about puberty was published by American Girl.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I
like
forgot about that.
I'm pretty sure that's how I learned about tampons, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Can you imagine if there was a doll-sized tampon?
But wait, hold on. Aren't the dolls supposed to be like 7 or 8 or something? How old are the dolls supposed to be?
So this is different.
No, but so American Girl publishes other sort of like educational books for girls that are not associated with the dolls.
Yeah,
yes, they are all supposed to be like young, mostly before puberty.
That's
actually a few of the books that go into like the later series talk about going into puberty, if I remember correctly. I could be not remembering at all, but
that's important information for somebody like me who's unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, there's a book called like The Care and Keeping of You, I think, and there's like a section. I mean, among other things, there's a section that's like, here's how to like handle your period. Here's like a tampon. Here's a pad. Here's how to insert them. And let me tell you, that was very helpful for many people I knew growing up.
Especially if you come from a family that gets very weird about female bodily functions.
I'm mostly just kind of like, is this normal for dolls in general, or are they being innovative here? Because we've talked a bunch about the ways in which they are at once both kind of progressive and kind of innovative, and also just trying to commodify and commercialize as much as they can because they're still a company. So,
well, it is America, an American Girl, and capitalism.
It's American Girl, it's America,
it
sure.
Is, yeah. I think
I know there's a pregnant Barbie that was big when I was a kid, right? That was a thing that they did. Are they doing that where they're trying to like, is this like a normal thing? Are other dolls talking about periods and stuff, or is this just an American Girl doll thing?
Now I think that there's a lot that's more widespread. In the 90s, in the early 2000s, I don't know that I knew of another. I was not aware of any other, toys specifically marketed towards girls that were addressing that. There were definitely books. I think that was kind of a growing thing, was basically like, let's write books and things that like help, especially girls. But I think like just kids in general, like learn about themselves and health and like all these other things.
I poked around the American Girl store, like online store in preparation for this episode. And they now have like some books actually geared toward boys, specifically.
Yeah. And so I think like they were like American Girls, like the American Girl doll, and company, I think has like its moments of being progressive and innovative in terms of, because you have to remember, it's also like, it's a doll and a toy company, but like education on some level is like pretty integral to a lot of their products. So like, I think that kind of puts them in their own little niche, because like, while Barbie has these sort of, has these sort of products as well, like, even when you get like Dr. Barbie, there's not a book that comes with it about a story about a lady becoming a doctor. Like, and I think that puts it in kind of its own little weird bubble. Because there's not really I think there's still really the main, they're no longer the only toy company that does that, but I think they're still really the main one, especially for things specifically made for like people interested in feminine coded toys.
You're talking about the generally coded girl thing, but maybe that's another, like, I'm trying to figure out how to even ask this question. Is that a controversial thing, right? Like the entire idea of American Girl, as progressive or not as it may be, we're still talking about classically coded. These are girl toys that are, it has American Girl in the name. This is a girl toy. It's for girls, and we don't want you roughhousing it because it cost $150. So, so like it is it seems like it's designed to sort of promote daintiness and delicacy and traditional feminine values of 10-year-olds. Is that true? Or is it like, I don't know, is there an American Girl doll that plays rugby?
Yeah, they do sell like sportier options. And Kit, like her big thing was, she's super into baseball. But you're right that it is those are activities that you would be performing separately than your doll, because there is this sense of like, you do need to take care of your doll. Like the dolls themselves have these little like strings that come from their head, and if you pull on them, their head pops off. So like, which is a like, you can't roughhouse with a doll. Yeah, you can't roughhouse with a doll where its entire like design concept is that if you play with it too hard, the head pops off. Because there's an entire
like
sort
permanently, like that's a break, or that's like you can clean it this way.
No. So dolls used to be like sort of made in this way where all of the limbs were sort of like tied.
Removable.
Yeah, and removable. And American Girl has like a very elaborate doll hospital. So if you do pull on those strings a little too hard and remove the head, you can get it retied.
Okay.
And they really,
but a kid's not doing it himself or herself.
A kid is not restringing a doll themselves.
Okay.
The doll hospital itself is really like kind of it's a crazy concept. So I actually had a doll who had a manufacturing defect, and these stickers inside her eyes peeled off. So I actually have
I don't
photos.
want that.
I'll send you photos. You maybe don't want to see
Please
those
do.
photos, and you might want to skip over those photos. But in the lighter colored doll eyes, in the original sort of looks like you dolls, it's inside, so you can't like just re-put a sticker on it. Basically, like the sticker inside the eyeball peels off. And so I sent it back in, and they replaced her eyeballs and sent them back to me. And she showed up in a hospital gown with a little medical bracelet, because this really like is aimed at kids. Like I read a statistic that's like, despite the fact that like your mom is the one doing all the buying and might have been the one who talked you into it, everything in the store is the average height of a 9-year-old.
Absolutely.
So it really still is meant to have this like emphasis on the girl as the owner.
Teach you consumption right now so that you can pass it on to your daughter one day.
Yeah.
I think that's also sort of yes, it's all consumerist and kind of gross, but I think that's also part of the appeal of American Girl is, and again, generational specificity of the 90s. I feel like there were so few toy brands that were interested in making things that centered young girls specifically.
Yeah.
And their experience. Like, and specifically, like, there are all kinds of issues with the books and the representation of girls, but at the same time, how many other toys were really like foregrounding the idea that like not only do girls have agency, but also girls have always had agency throughout history, right? Because they're not like sitting at home, knitting, or if they are, they're like thinking about the world, and they're like engaging with their friends, and like they're engaging with what's going on around them, like historically. And yes, like Barbie has that, but I think also like Barbie came to that, whereas American Girl, I think like that seems like it was a focus from the beginning.
I also like I really appreciate how American Girl like stories found adventure in the everyday, and of course the everyday was centered in a particular historical context. But some of these books have a lot of plot, and some of these books are more like we're like chilling. We're like some things happen, but like there's no like traditional sort of narrative arc, and it really like a lot of these books like also just think about like friendship. So like I remember vividly reading about Kit and how she like makes friends with the boy who comes to stay with her, and also how she's friends with Ruthie, and like there's like a lot of bonds of friendship. I mean, like Kirsten's book, she's brokenhearted over Marta's death, and I was brokenhearted a little bit, and we've talked about like bonding with our moms a little bit, and my sister and I played together, and I always quote this book, but Between Women does focus on like Victorian women's relationships, but it really like reminds me every time about how like women have interacted with dolls, with themselves, and how like women-centered stories and like relationships between women are so important to the everyday life of women throughout history.
Well, I have one last question before
oh no
from just things that I was researching today for this episode, that like before this is going to be a long episode, but I'm learning a lot, so I'm enjoying it. But okay, so given everything that we've talked about and the history of these dolls and what they've meant to you, and from the fashion to the body positivity to the ethnicity positivity, such that it is to teaching you to be a good little American consumer at age 9. Can someone please explain the underwear controversy to me, please? Because this was a hole I fell in this afternoon that I'm like, oh my God, this is a thing. And
I mean, can you summarize the underwear controversy for us?
Okay, my understanding,
your afternoon of deep research.
Yeah. Okay. So my understanding is what happened was at some point in 2017, the company decided to redesign the physical bodies of American Girl dolls for the first time in decades. And one of the changes or I guess the first change they had done was they'd moved the fabric of the body, the material of the body, to be more flesh colored instead of just the head. And that's apparently a pretty early change. And then the body stays relatively constant until like 2017, where the company makes an announcement that from here on out, the pelvis of the American Girl doll body will now have, I don't know why they announced this and didn't just do it, but they announced on their Facebook that the pelvis would now have underwear built in, like stitched in. So the girls are now permanently wearing panties. And then people had like a shitstorm of, oh my God, no, but they did it anyway. And this lasts for several months of just constant complaints from the fans till eventually the company relents and goes backwards and says, no, okay, we've heard you. The dolls will be naked again. and they fixed it. And oh my God, I have so many questions.
Let me footnote this real quick because I think it's important. The change they said will affect all of the Truly Me dolls, the Be Forever characters, Julie, Melody, and Mary Ellen, and some of our contemporary dolls to come. So it wasn't from what
they didn't change the originals, you're saying?
Well, like some of the originals have been retired for a while, but I'm saying like it didn't affect all the historical dolls, which I think is an important note for this discussion.
Which I think gives insight into why they made this decision.
Okay.
I think it has to do with clothing construction. So for people who don't know about, like, and I think Monica, you were talking about this earlier, like most of the dolls have period appropriate underwear, which means older dolls have something akin to like bloomers or like almost like, I think like Molly actually basically had boxers, if I remember correctly. I could be completely off base off of that. But anyway, they're more period appropriate undergarments, which tend to be a little bit less form fitting just because we don't have knits yet.
Sure.
The newer ones, 20th century and the more contemporary, have like knit stretchy underwear.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them include elastic. And my assumption, having worked with elastic and having made underwear before, is that it's a manufacturing and construction issue. It's that making something that small and fiddly that fits properly and also doesn't disrupt the clothing that goes over it is difficult. It's probably much easier, especially like disrupting the clothing that goes on top of it, I think is especially the big thing, because you don't want, like you want it's not the same as underwear for a human being where you can keep it from shifting around and you can adjust things. It's like, it's on the doll. So you don't want like panty lines showing through your doll's dress. So I think it's like, I get the like people freaking out because, you know, whatever reason, but I'm guessing that's why.
I have a question though. Did when they made the built-in underwear, did they stop me? Because I only know about this from reading a couple of articles today. So I'm not by no means. The way I was reading it, I was understanding that they were still selling American Girl doll underwear for these dolls that you would wear over the underwear that were built in. That's why I'm very confused.
Well, I think that's Hannah's point is that the modern ones that would historically have the knit underwear have the knit underwear. The historical ones, the change was not made.
Okay. Okay.
Which might be part of where the controversy is coming from, because I can see the people who are really invested in the historical ones thinking that this was for the historical dolls as well, and then flipping out because it's not period appropriate.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have a theory. One, the dolls like didn't always come with underwear to start with. Like not every outfit included underwear, which just feels like it's like a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is this is around the time that they're introducing also their first male doll. And they had sort of like male babies before, but they never had male 9-year-olds before. And I think at some point in time that we decided that we had to think about the sexuality of these dolls, because there was a point where like panty lines didn't matter. Like I have an outfit that Samantha came from that is just a coat and a scarf. Like there was no dress, and none of her dresses, like they're all too wide to be worn with this coat because it's cut in a very narrow way. And so like when I would play with her, or her winter coat was sort of the same. It just came with a winter coat. There was never anything that like, there was never the equivalent of like a turtleneck that you would throw under it. She was just naked under that coat because you didn't need that for the imaginative play of it being winter. And I feel like dolls don't necessarily need underwear for the imaginative play of like being dressed. And so I think that the reason this underwear comes about is because it becomes a gender thing, because now they have a male doll.
Mm-hmm.
And there certainly was controversies that we won't give airtime to about male dolls. So that
Yeah.
will
Oh, God.
track.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like I said, we're moving on.
But is that a thing for other? I mean, so I am aware. I have Barbie dolls, right? I actually own several, and I am aware that they sell underwear for Barbie dolls. But also, I have watched 8-year-olds play with Barbie dolls and other baby dolls, you know, American Girl, Cabbage Patch. And I don't recall exactly what Monica just said. I don't recall meeting an 8-year-old who was concerned ever whether her doll had panties on under her outfit or not. Right. Like,
I think this is more for the adult consumers
Yep.
that are buying
Okay.
dolls
Yep.
for their kids.
Yeah, because every kid that I've ever seen dress a doll from Barbie to Cabbage Patch to American Girl of any size is just like, she's wearing a dress today. I'm putting the dress over her head, and that's done.
I don't think this is a controversy. I don't think the controversy is driven by kids, and I also don't think the decision on the part of American Girl dolls was made with the girls in mind. I think that was largely. I think actually Monica's theory sounds really compelling to me. It had to do with the fact that now we have to think about the gender and sexuality of these dolls in a way that they did not previously, and also think about like how parents are responding, especially in the context of like how people respond to male dolls, which I think Hannah's right. That's another episode.
Yeah, well, I mean, Ken's been around for a long time, you know, so so we've resolved nothing, I guess. But I've learned a whole lot.
I should do more toy episodes.
Yeah, I think that like loving American Girl as a person who studied the 19th century for too long, it's complicated. There's a lot of complicated feelings about it. And just, generally being a human who's an adult now.
It's fascinating that it is this weird fandom, for lack of a better term. I mean, this is our show is pop culture. It's not always going to be superheroes. And I love the amount of between the lore of what American Girl dolls are to the collector's market to the utter nerd rage of how dare you change the way underwear work,
It just goes to show that nerd rage is universal across all hobbies. It just manifests in different ways.
Right. That's exactly what I was getting at. And like, cause I know, Hannah, you're studying Victorian literature. Like I've been to conferences where I've watched people, they don't come to blows the way nerds do sometimes because they're culture sophisticated and mostly 70. But maybe you've seen them actually fight. I've not,
There's like some apocryphal story that admittedly is not my field about Edgar Allan Poe, and there's a mystery story, and there's an orangutan, and apparently you do not bring that up ever.
Well,
at a conference.
So, yeah, but anyway, that sort of thing, and I love the amount of. It's what I love about this show. This is not my fandom, obviously. It's not something that I knew a lot about, but like just spending this week sort of reading up on it and deep diving it and listening to both from, the three of you knowing more about the, academic historical accuracy of the stuff, as well as just on a personal level, the personal relationship of nostalgia that you have for them is interesting to me and fascinating that, so I learned a lot. So it was fun for nobody else. It was fun for me. And I edit the show. So the listeners have to deal with it.
It was fun for me too, as your guest, for the record.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for joining us, Monica. Anything you want to plug, let people know about, you should tell people, because we hinted about a lot about the fact that you are a fashion historian. And I know what you do. Tell the people what you do.
Sure. So I'm a fashion historian, but the thing that I specialize in specifically is superhero fashion. And when I say that, I don't mean cape and tights superhero fashion. What I mean is that I study the civilian clothing that is worn by superheroes when they're out of costume. And I do that for both comics and their film and television adaptations.
Please tell me we're doing a show on that.
Monica can come back whenever she wants to do the show on it.
Yeah, let's do a show on it.
We'll just let you monologue for an hour.
Pretty sure it would be fine. Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
They can find me on Instagram or on Twitter under the handle Monica Marvelous.
And she'll be linked in the show notes. Palindrome Hannah, what about you?
Well, actually, I was on a podcast last week.
Oh my God. In a perfect world, are you on every show every week?
No. If you really want to hear me deep dive into a specific 19th century text, the Protagonist podcast let me fulfill my dream and talk about Charles Dickens's Little Dorrit for an hour. I don't know how the listeners feel about that, but I enjoyed it.
Anyway, it's a 900-page book. It's a good episode. Everybody should go listen to it.
I didn't pick Clarissa. That would have just been mean. That's the longest book in the English language.
Katya, where can people find you?
You can occasionally find me on Instagram at just that nerd kid, but yeah, sometimes. Really, I'm just here mostly, and on Animal Crossing. I guess you could probably find me on my Animal Crossing island, but you'd have to message me on Instagram for my dodo code.
Well, there you go. There's a reason to connect with Katya on Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, all the places, always at Chris Maverick. You can follow the show, all those same places at Vox Popcast, where you can follow exciting at Vox Popcast now works on YouTube, which is the thing that I've been waiting for the longest time. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, always at Vox Popcast. That gets you to our social media. You can also follow the show's blog at www.voxpopcast.com, where you find out about what we're talking about next week. I don't even know what we're talking about next week. We need to figure that out. But we post blogs, we post calls for comments. We ask you to contribute your ideas and your thoughts so that we can talk about them on the air like we did today. And sometimes we pick guests from those as well. So give us your thoughts. And if you enjoy the show, and we certainly hope you do, otherwise, why are you still here through all this nonsense that we do at the end of the show? But thank you for sticking around. And we thank you even more if you do us a favor and write us a 5-star review, especially on Apple Podcasts. That helps people find the show by tweaking the algorithm, makes us more popular, yada, yada, yada. Subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever the hell you get podcasts from. And once again, subscribe to our YouTube show. This should be a really interesting show to do on YouTube because there's a lot of doll pictures and, they'll be interesting to look at. So I would like to thank Maximilian of Thoughtform Music for our epic theme song, building ever so more epically and playing us out. I'd once again like to thank Monica for joining us. I'd like to thank you at home for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.